I was the coordinator for research at the PEAR Lab for quite a number of years, from the time I joined the group in 1980 until I retired in 2002. My wife says I didn't really retire because although I wasn't doing exactly the same kind of work, I continued work of that nature in what I call the Global Consciousness Project. It's basically in the PEAR Lab and also in the Global Consciousness Project, an effort to learn about the nature of consciousness and in particular how consciousness exists in the world. In both cases, we were looking at various kinds of experiments, careful scientific experiments, which were exploring the possibility that human consciousness isn't stuck inside your head, but extends out into the world and has effects in that world. Over the years of the Global Consciousness Project, and even in a time when we were working in the laboratory with just individuals, we began to see that there is a kind of effect of human consciousness in the world, basically meaning that we're not isolated inside our skins, but instead are part of the world in a large, meaningful way, so that what we think and desire and what we intend becomes a part of the world. We, in other words, determine to some degree. Some people go further and say that we are the determination of what the world is really like. In other words, that consciousness is a kind of fundamental out of which the world that we experience arises. It's a complicated kind of thing philosophically, and my work in this area has always been experimental. I basically like the idea of doing an experiment where you define the question very clearly that you're trying to answer, or the interest that you have, and then implement a kind of scientific process that will allow an understanding and perhaps a validation of the point of view that underlies the question in the first place. Who are we? How are we connected to the world? Why is the human consciousness connected into the world and also to other people? I think that the ultimate answer to the question about interconnection is that although we cannot perceive it directly, we are interconnected. We are parts of a unity that I hope we come to understand more deeply and profoundly in the near future. It's imperative, really, for us to become the human beings that we're capable of, that we have the potential to be, because we have a kind of responsibility for our own future, for the future of the world, and that is to become unified in our management and stewardship of the world that we inhabit. The research that I personally am doing or have been doing is linked to the past, as many people have said. I stand on the shoulders of giants. The kinds of questions that I ask are ones that have been present in the minds and the expectations of scientists for as long as there has been science. And I think from long before that, we have had a kind of spiritual background from which our scientific questions arise. I don't think we often acknowledge that, but it's true that the spiritual quest and the scientific quest are not really different in their fundamental nature. They're just different sets of tools. So I think what I've been doing, and my colleagues as well, is establishing a set of answers to a set of preliminary questions. And I really hope that there will be continuing efforts to expand what we have established, to understand it more deeply, and come to understand more clearly who we are and what consciousness is about. It's interesting to consider what the background is of my interests in consciousness research. Actually, I think it really comes from my childhood when I was just what we called, where I was growing up, a curious child. I wanted to know everything. You know? I was interested in the smallest details of nature and also the grandest aspects of our universe. So I looked at the insects and I looked at the stars. And in between, I could see things like yoga and meditation and spiritual quests, and recognize that these were addressing questions about who we are and what we are to become. And those have inspired ultimately a kind of scientific quest to answer the same kinds of questions. I think science is an absolutely wonderful, powerful set of tools. And I personally believe that it's not the only way to look at questions of importance to us as humans, but a very powerful way and a very robust set of tools, because you can establish with great certainty the answer to a question that you're asking. So at that point, once you have a set of scientific tools, the first task is to establish a question, to ask a good question. Because asking a good question, given the arsenal of scientific apparatus, asking a good question is tantamount to producing the answer that will be useful. Science is a kind of stepwise process. You produce a good question, and the science produces an answer to that question. But every answer to every question leads to more questions. In our complex world, I don't think we should ever have an expectation of the final answer or knowing everything. It's just much too big a world. If I look ahead to the achievements in science and spirituality for that matter, I look for a greater integration. At the present time, I think a lot of scientists believe that what they're doing is science divorced from the natural world and the spiritual world. But in fact, I believe younger people are beginning, not just beginning, they're well along in an understanding, or toward an understanding, that not only we humans are one, but so are the aspects of our world, like science, art, and spirituality. Those things are really different kinds of sets of tools for answering or asking similar kinds of questions. They're just different perspectives. They're almost like the two sides of a coin. Whether you turn the coin heads or tails up, it's the same coin. And I think spirituality and science are rather like that when you get down to the fundamentals. When we are asking a powerful, a deep, well-formed spiritual question, it is the same question that we should be asking using science. My experience leads me to say that what I expect and hope for the future for existential consciousness research is more of the same. It's like building on this platform and foundation that has already been built. It's a kind of, the recommendation is really for something that's already happening, but just more consciously. We should be open. We should be wise about the kinds of questions we ask and the kind of people we bring into the fold, so to speak, in order to deal with questions that are very important for humanity. Existential consciousness. That really refers to who we are and who we will become. It is our existence that we're talking about, and we need to be conscious about that, especially for a curious child.